away.
My little girl was crying, "Daddy, Daddy." When I woke up, the whole house was in smoke.
On a cold December morning in 1991, the quiet streets of Corsicana, Texas were shattered by screams and the acrid smell of smoke. At 1213 West 11th Avenue, a modest single-story home was engulfed in flames that would forever change American justice. Inside, 3 little girls lay sleeping, 2-year-old Amber, and twins Carmen and Cameron, just 1 year old. Their young lives were about to become the center of one of the most controversial capital punishment cases in modern American history. Their father, Cameron Todd Willingham, stood outside in the front yard, screaming for help as flames devoured his home. Neighbors would later describe seeing this 23-year-old man in apparent anguish.
I think Sheila's house. Todd at his front door, and he started screaming, "My babies, oh my babies are burning."
His hair singed, his face blackened by smoke, claiming he had tried desperately to save his children but couldn't get past the intense flames and toxic fumes that filled the house. Some witnesses reported seeing him attempting to re-enter the burning structure multiple times, only to be driven back by the overwhelming heat. The fire department arrived within minutes, but it was already too late. The flames had consumed the children's bedroom, and despite the firefighters' efforts, all 3 girls perished in the blaze. What began as a tragic house fire would soon transform into something far more sinister. A capital murder case that would divide forensic experts, challenge the reliability of fire investigation science, and ultimately raise haunting questions about whether the state of Texas executed an innocent man. Fire investigators arrived at the scene that morning and began their examination of the charred remains of the Willingham home. What they claimed to find would seal Cameron Todd Willingham's fate and send him to death row. According to their analysis, conducted using techniques that were standard practice in the early 1990s, the fire showed clear and unmistakable signs of arson. They pointed to what they called pour patterns on the floor. Irregular burn marks and V-shaped scorch patterns that they believed indicated accelerant had been deliberately poured throughout the house in a methodical pattern designed to ensure maximum destruction. The investigators identified what appeared to be multiple points of origin throughout the house, suggesting the fire had been deliberately set in different locations to guarantee that the flames would spread rapidly and fatally. They found what they interpreted as evidence of liquid accelerant on the front porch and in the hallway leading to the children's bedroom. Most damning of all, they testified that the fire's behavior, the intensity of the burn patterns, and the specific damage to the house were completely inconsistent with an accidental fire. In their professional opinion, backed by years of training and experience, this was deliberate arson, and with 3 children dead as a direct result, it constituted capital murder. The investigation revealed troubling details about Cameron Todd Willingham's personal life that would later be used to build a case for motive. He had a history of domestic violence, having been arrested previously for assaulting his wife. His marriage was troubled and volatile, marked by frequent arguments and separations. His wife, Stacy, had left him just days before the fire, taking the children with her, but had returned them to his care for the Christmas holidays. Financial pressures were mounting. Willingham was unemployed and the family was struggling to make ends meet in their modest rental home. Cameron Todd Willingham was arrested and charged with 3 counts of capital murder. The prosecution, led by the district attorney's office, painted him as a man driven to desperation by his crumbling marriage and financial problems. They argued that he had deliberately set the fire to kill his children, perhaps in a moment of rage or as the ultimate act of revenge against his estranged wife. The prosecution suggested that he had then staged his own desperate rescue attempts to appear innocent, playing the role of a grieving father to cover up his heinous crime. During the trial, which began in the summer of 1992, the fire investigators took the stand with absolute confidence in their findings. They spoke in technical terms about burn patterns, heat damage, smoke movement, and chemical indicators that they claimed proved beyond any reasonable doubt that this fire was intentionally set.
Courthouse.
My ex-husband murdered my daughters, and just before he was executed, he
He told me he did it. He stood and watched while their tiny bodies burned.
They used diagrams, photographs, and scientific-sounding terminology to explain their conclusions to the jury.
Let's have a hearing here where she can testify under oath, and we would welcome her. Maybe then she can explain why she gave media a totally different account after that last meeting with her ex-husband, the last time she spoke.
If the trial was taking place based today or scientific evidence.
To the 12 men and women deciding Willingham's fate, these investigators seemed like true scientists, armed with objective forensic evidence that could not lie. The defense team, working with limited resources and facing what appeared to be overwhelming physical evidence, struggled to counter the prosecution's fire science testimony. After all, what did lawyers and their witnesses know about the complex science of fire investigation C, compared to trained professionals who dealt with arson cases regularly? The defense argued that Willingham was a loving father who would never harm his children, but they could not effectively challenge the technical evidence that seemed to prove he had set the fire. Willingham himself took the stand in his own defense, maintaining his innocence with unwavering conviction. He told the jury that he had been awakened by the sound of Amber screaming and the smell of smoke filling the house. He described trying to navigate through the thick black smoke to reach his children's bedroom, but being repeatedly driven back by the intense heat and toxic fumes that made breathing nearly impossible. He claimed he had tried multiple times to save his daughters, sustaining burns and smoke inhalation in the process, but the fire had progressed too rapidly for him to reach them. His story never wavered under cross-examination, but it wasn't enough to overcome the prosecution's seemingly scientific evidence. The jury heard testimony about Willingham's troubled past, his volatile relationship with his wife, and his alleged lack of appropriate emotional response to his children's deaths. Witnesses testified that he seemed more concerned about his damaged possessions than his dead daughters, and that his behavior at the funeral was inappropriate and cold. The prosecution painted a picture of a man capable of the unthinkable, a father who could murder his own children in cold blood. In August 1992, after deliberating for less than an hour, the jury found Cameron Todd Willingham guilty on all 3 counts of capital murder. The speed of their verdict reflected their certainty in the evidence presented to them. During the penalty phase of the trial, they sentenced him to death, convinced that his crimes warranted the ultimate punishment. Willingham was formally sentenced to death and transported to death row at the Ellis Unit in Huntsville, Texas. For the next 12 long years, Willingham sat in a small cell on death row, continuing to proclaim his innocence to anyone who would listen. He filed appeal after appeal through the Texas court system and federal courts, each one meticulously challenging different aspects of his conviction and sentence. His lawyers argued that the evidence was insufficient, that his trial representation was inadequate, and that the fire investigation was flawed. But each appeal was systematically denied by judges who found no reversible error in his conviction. As the years passed on death row, Willingham became increasingly desperate. He wrote letters to journalists, family members, and anyone who might help prove his innocence. He studied law books in the prison library, searching for any legal argument that might save his life. He watched as other inmates were executed while his own appeals wound their way through the courts with agonizing slowness. The case moved through the Texas death penalty system with what seemed like grinding inevitability. Appeals denied, stays of execution rejected, execution dates set and sometimes postponed, but always with the final outcome appearing certain. The final date was set, February 17, 2004. After more than a decade of legal battles, Cameron Todd Willingham's time had run out. The governor declined to commute his sentence. The courts rejected his final appeals. The Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles unanimously refused to recommend clemency. The execution would proceed as scheduled. On his final day, Cameron Todd Willingham followed the grim ritual that every condemned prisoner in Texas must endure. He was moved from his regular death row cell to a holding cell adjacent to the execution chamber, where he would spend his last hours. The walls of this cell had witnessed the final moments of hundreds of condemned men before him. He was allowed visits from his spiritual advisor and his lawyers, who made last-minute attempts to contact anyone who might intervene to stop the execution. Prison officials offered him a final meal, a tradition that allows condemned prisoners to choose their last food on earth. Willingham requested a barbecue dinner, but his request was denied because he had no money in his prison account to pay for it. This cruel irony, a man about to be executed being denied his final meal request over a few dollars, highlighted the cold bureaucracy of the death penalty system. Instead, he was given the standard prison meals served to all inmates that day. As 6 p.m. approached, the time set for his execution, witnesses began gathering in the viewing rooms adjacent to the death chamber. His ex-wife Stacy was there, along with other family members of the victims. Representatives of the media had also assembled to witness and report on the execution. Prison officials, medical personnel, and other required witnesses took their places as the final preparations began. The lethal injection began at precisely 6:14 p.m. The first chemical, sodium pentothal, flowed into his bloodstream to render him unconscious. This was followed by pancuronium bromide, which paralyzed his respiratory system, and finally potassium chloride, which stopped his heart. Cameron Todd Willingham was pronounced dead at 6:20 p.m. on February 17, 2004. He was 36 years old, and he had spent more than one-third of his life on death row for a crime he maintained he did not commit. But Cameron Todd Willingham's story did not end with his execution. In fact, the most significant developments in his case were yet to come. Just months after his death, serious questions began to emerge about the fire science that had convicted him. Gerald Hurst, a renowned fire scientist and chemist with decades of experience in arson investigation, was asked to review the Willingham case. What he found would shake the foundations of fire investigation science and cast enormous doubt on the conviction that had sent Willingham to his death. Hurst's analysis revealed that virtually every conclusion reached by the original fire investigators was scientifically invalid. The so-called pour patterns that had convinced the jury of arson could easily have been caused by normal fire behavior, particularly the phenomenon known as flashover, when a room becomes so hot that everything in it ignites simultaneously. The multiple origin points that investigators had interpreted as evidence of deliberate fire setting could be explained by the way fire spreads and intensifies in enclosed spaces. The burn patterns on the porch that had been cited as evidence of accelerant were consistent with ordinary fire damage. Most significantly, Hurst found that many of the techniques and interpretations used by the 1991 investigators were based on outdated methods that had been debunked by modern fire science. The field of fire investigation had evolved considerably since Willingham's trial, with new research showing that many traditional indicators of arson were actually normal fire behavior that had been misunderstood for decades. The implications of Hurst's findings were staggering and deeply troubling. If the fire science was wrong, and Hurst was convinced it was completely wrong, then the entire case against Cameron Todd Willingham collapsed like a house of cards. There was no other credible evidence linking him to his daughter's deaths. No reliable motive that made sense under scrutiny. No witnesses to any crime. No physical evidence beyond the flawed fire investigation. Just a father who had apparently lost his children in a tragic accident, and then lost his own life to scientifically invalid forensic evidence. In 2009, 5 years after Willingham's execution, the Texas Forensic Science Commission launched a comprehensive investigation into the Willingham case. This was the first time a state had officially examined whether it might have executed an innocent person based on flawed forensic evidence. The commission's hearings drew national attention as expert after expert testified that the fire investigation from 1991 was fundamentally flawed and based on outdated, scientifically invalid methods. The commission's findings were devastating to the prosecution's case and to the credibility of the Texas criminal justice system. Leading fire scientists from around the country testified that the original investigators had relied on what amounted to folklore rather than science. They had misinterpreted normal fire behavior as evidence of arson, using techniques that modern science had proven to be unreliable. The commission concluded that the evidence used to convict and execute Willingham was scientifically baseless. These revelations sent shockwaves through the criminal justice community and raised profound questions about how many other cases might be based on similarly flawed forensic evidence. Fire investigation was not the only forensic discipline that had evolved significantly since the 1990s. Bite mark analysis, hair comparison, ballistics, and other forensic techniques had all been shown to be less reliable than once believed. The Willingham case became a symbol of everything that could go wrong with the death penalty system. It demonstrated how seemingly objective scientific evidence could be completely wrong, how the adversarial trial system could fail to catch flawed evidence, and how the appeals process could fail to correct a fundamental miscarriage of justice. Most troubling of all, it showed that these failures could result in the execution of an innocent person. The ultimate, irreversible mistake. Today, more than 2 decades after the fire that killed 3 little girls in Corsicana, Texas, Cameron Todd Willingham's case stands as a stark reminder of the fallibility of our justice system. Many experts, journalists, and legal scholars now believe with virtual certainty that Texas executed an innocent man, a father who died for a crime that may never have occurred at all. His case has sparked significant reforms in fire investigation techniques, led to the review of hundreds of other arson cases, and provided powerful ammunition for opponents of capital punishment. The tragedy extends beyond Cameron Todd Willingham himself. 3 little girls, Amber, Carmen, and Cameron, died in a house fire in Corsicana, Texas on December 23, 1991. Whether their father died for their murder or became the 4th victim of that terrible December morning may be a question that haunts the American justice system forever. Their deaths were a tragedy. Whether justice was served in their memory or whether a terrible injustice was compounded by the execution of their innocent father remains one of the most troubling questions in the modern history of American criminal justice.
His death for the murder